under arrest for what? What law have we violated?
We hadn't done anything wrong. I was handcuffed and accompanied the other people into the paddy wagon.
Kept taking our pictures and fingerprints. I realized that we weren't getting out right away. 3 felonies? I just couldn't imagine, just for trying to share the gospel.
We have compartmentalized where the gospel is allowed to go. That's what we've done.
The gay community wants tolerance. They can't tolerate a story like mine that says, you know, I used to be gay, but with the help of Jesus, I've been able to overcome that.
I believe the caricature that's painted of Christians as being mean and hateful, it creates a context where violence is being perpetrated against Christians.
The way Americans think about homosexuality has changed over the last 2 decades, and if you think that's an accident, think again. 2 homosexual activists wrote the book in 1989, After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 90s. In that book, Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen laid out powerful and sophisticated propaganda techniques to manipulate people into accepting the homosexual lifestyle. Hello, I'm Janet Parshall, and in this program we'll examine the agenda and the accomplishment of homosexual activists and the impact of their astonishing success on families and on our freedom of religion. Stay tuned. This program could change the way you see the future of your family and our nation.
Being politically correct has replaced being biblically correct.
It's a direct attack on religious freedom.
If we don't speak up and get involved, then we're aiding and abetting the destruction of Christianity.
We never thought that this would ever happen in America.
In their book, Kirk and Madsen proposed a strategy for homosexual activists to gain acceptance from a skeptical public using 3 basic techniques of propaganda: desensitizing, jamming, and conversion. According to the author, straight Americans were on triple red alert because they perceived homosexuals to be an overwhelming threat. But if activists weren't offensive, straights might remain annoyed by their lifestyle, but eventually would become desensitized to it. And the second step in their strategy was jamming. Jamming has the same effect on a person's belief system as jamming a tire iron into a machine to destroy it. And it works like this. First, it throws your belief system into conflict by linking something you believe to be good with something bad, and then making what you believe socially unacceptable. Homosexual activists redefined words. They began to call themselves gays. They labeled people who disagreed with them homophobes and bigots. The trick, Kirk and Madsen said, is to get someone opposed to homosexuality into the position of feeling a conflicting twinge of shame whenever his homo hatred surfaces. Our effect is achieved without reference to facts, logic, or proof. They proposed a technique called conversion. Kirk and Madsen said they would bombard the public with images of homosexuals who look like the kind of men people admire, women desire, and other men want to be like. Kirk and Madsen wrote, "It makes no difference that the images were lies, and by conversion, we actually mean something far more profoundly threatening to the American way of life. We mean conversion of the average American's emotions, mind, and will through a planned psychological attack in the form of propaganda fed to the nation via the media." Now keep in mind, this was written in 1989. Homosexual activists have come a long way using these techniques. In this program, we're going to look at the homosexual movement, their accomplishments, their political objectives, and the effect on your family and our nation. Since the media is so important to their agenda, let's begin there.
We're at a point in 2008 where there were 65 gay characters in the new television season on primetime and in cable, the largest number of recurring gay characters in history, according to GLAAD. Now, these gay characters have a very important role. They're usually the appealing friend, often persuading people to rethink their traditional morality and come around by the end of the show and realize that their aversion to homosexuality just stemmed from bigotry or ignorance. It's the same script over and over and over.
I now pronounce them officially
married.
I've been surprised at how quickly the concept that homosexuals should be allowed special rights, and it's probably because there have been people who are in positions of influence throughout our society that are promoting those ideas in schools, in government, in media, in Hollywood, in advertising. It seems like there's nowhere you can turn where you're not being bombarded with messages that claim that homosexuals and transsexuals and others should be given special rights.
Ashland, Kentucky is coal country, nestled in the state's eastern corner on the border of West Virginia and Ohio. People here are mainly conservative. The community, tight-knit. It's a place where families raise their children with traditional values. But even this picturesque community hasn't escaped the reach of the homosexual lobby. When Boyd County schools introduced sexual diversity training that promoted the homosexual lifestyle and made it a mandatory part of the curriculum, student T.J. Morrison's family took them to court.
First thing I think we heard was, you know, the ACLU has come in and they're going to have a gay training.
Well, they basically told us from the beginning that the kids were not allowed to disagree, that this was an anti-harassment, anti-bullying video. And they never brought up anything about homosexuality when they were discussing it. But then when you watch the video, the entire content of the video was on homosexuality.
The video in question presented homosexuality as an immutable or unchangeable characteristic. Students were told they could not make any comments that disagreed with this idea, and they were not allowed to object on religious grounds. But there was also no provision for parents to opt their children out of the program.
They have a right to go out and say that they're gay and, you know, gay is good and all this other stuff. You know, I should have a right to say that I don't believe in it.
Well, what's going on in many of these situations is it's an attempt to silence people who basically hold to a traditional view of marriage and oppose same-sex conduct and sexual activity.
And they said that once that child steps through that door, they belong to the school district. And I specifically asked them, I said, you're telling me that my child is no longer mine as long as he's on school property? And they said that is correct.
These children should have the same rights as anybody else to be able to express their opinions in opposition to homosexual conduct, and they should be not be forced by the government into situations where they're being indoctrinated in beliefs the parents don't agree with. Parents really need to stand up for these kinds of situations and just not let it go by.
T.J. Morrison felt a great deal of support from his fellow students.
I got a lot of, you know, I'm glad you're doing this, and like it takes a lot of guts to do this.
When these kinds of situations come, when there's this sort of intimidation that's going on, that people need to stand up for what's right, for their children, for future generations. What will our children and grandchildren grow up in? What kind of a society will they grow up in if basically all sexual behavior and all forms of marriage are defined as equally valid? That is a recipe for national decline over time. That no nation can sustain itself with that kind of sexual and family ethic.
Attorneys with the Alliance Defense Fund filed the lawsuit on behalf of T.J. Morrison in February 2005. The case has been in the court system since that date and is currently being appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. The main issue in this case is that Christian students should not be prohibited from expressing their beliefs. The attorneys believe T.J. is entitled to a judicial ruling that affirms his constitutional rights.
The National Education Association is on board 100% with the homosexual lobby's wish list, with their goals. So they have an in our system of public education. Groups like GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, they provide the curriculum that is being taught in our sex ed classes throughout schools and in civics classes and elsewhere. They provide the curriculum, so they have a direct avenue, a direct route to your children.
Fundamentally, it is the right of the parent to provide for the education of the children, not the government.
and not the professional educators. It's the parents' right.
One day they're reading about puppy dogs, and the next day they're reading about going to the beach or having an argument with a friend, and then all of a sudden they're confronted with two princes who fall in love and want to get married. And the kids are going, oh, what is going on here? And I think that's the real danger that we're confronting, is that our kids are guinea pigs, because we don't know the long-term impact of these kinds of lessons for little children. And we have a whole group of adults who are homosexual or lesbian saying, this is fine. Kids can handle two mommies or two daddies, but we don't have the scientific data to prove that that's okay. And we have plenty of evidence at the experiential level that says kids can't handle this. Kids are very perplexed by it.
Family values, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and morality are all threatened by a radical homosexual activist agenda that's redefining the family, demanding same-sex marriage, teaching children that homosexuality is normal, homosexuals serving in the armed forces, hate crime laws threatening freedom of speech, laws forcing churches and Christian businesses to hire homosexuals, minority status, and preferential treatment for homosexuals. If you think that agenda is bad for America, you must do something. Call today or go online to participate in the American Family Association's Family Values Survey. We'll send the results to leaders in the media, the entertainment industry, large corporations, and elected officials who support the homosexual activist agenda because they think you don't care. Let them know you do. You can make a difference. Go online at silencingchristians.com to request your copy of the Family Values Survey, or call 800-767-7440, or write to American Family Association, P.O. Drawer 2440, Tupelo, Mississippi 38803. Along with the survey, we'll also send you the book, Homosexuality: Exposing the Myths. Get informed. Be heard. Don't be speechless.
Homosexuals have all the rights that everybody else does. They weren't, confined to homosexual drinking fountains. They weren't required to sit at the back of the booth. They weren't bought and sold as slaves. And certainly the fact that there are tens of thousands of people who have been involved in that lifestyle, who have found freedom from that lifestyle, ex-homosexuals, that shows that certainly it cannot be equated to the civil rights struggle of the 1960s.
Homosexuals define themselves based on their sexual desires and sexual behavior. In 1989, the public wasn't very accepting of their lifestyle. So the authors of After the Ball suggested that activists take the focus off their sexual behaviors and link to something more acceptable, like the civil rights movement. They argued that people would hate to be perceived as bigots, and that bigotry had caused the suffering or even death of innocent homosexuals. Remember, they actually wrote in the book, "Our effect is achieved without reference to facts, logic, or proof." And after all these years, there's still no proof. But that doesn't seem to have deterred them in the slightest. I'd like you now to meet a young woman who is living proof that there is no homosexual gene. Christine Sneringer is the director of Worthy Creations, a ministry in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, helping homosexuals who want to get out of that destructive lifestyle.
I grew up believing that to be a woman was a liability, really, because my mother was a victim of domestic violence in my home. And so I rejected anything to do with my gender from a very young age, and I was very masculine throughout my childhood, playing sports and anything that the guys normally did, cops and robbers, and riding my bicycle over a ramp, and all the boy things. Throughout my childhood, even into adulthood, people called me sir, son, and young man, because they just couldn't tell that I was a girl because I had adopted such masculine qualities. Because I saw my mother as a victim and not somebody I wanted to be like, in my heart, I rejected her on some level. And so growing up, I never had that real strong bond with her. And I realized, in hindsight, looking back, that part of my homosexuality and what I was looking for in lesbian relationships was that I was looking for my mother's love in the arms of another woman. I was also looking for protection from men because my father abused my mom growing up, and I had been also sexually abused as a young girl, and so I had a very negative view of men. And when you come to that conclusion, women become the only safe option in relationships. I found myself on a softball team from a church, and so I was surrounded by Christians because it was a Baptist church, and I was playing softball with them. It was like I woke up one day and said, I want to be like them. I want people like that in my life. I just want to know what it is about them. Why are they so different? And so it was really the love of Jesus that they displayed for each other and for me that drew me in to want to know their God. At the time that I made the decision to walk with God and say, okay, whatever you have for me, and even though I don't know how to live without homosexuality, I want to live how you want me to live. So, I knew that I wanted Jesus even more than my homosexuality. Just in working with so many people now as a director of a ministry that helps people coming out of homosexuality for the last 10 years, just seeing people routinely and hearing their stories and hearing so many common themes, like, for example, breakdown in the relationship with the same-sex parent, gender confusion, peer rejection and labeling, where a little boy grows up and he's not considered masculine by his peers, so his peers reject him and label him and call him names like sissy, fag, and queer, not because he acts out in those ways, but because he's not good on the ball field or the playing field. He's not rough and tumble like other boys. And so then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Just like if you tell a kid long enough that he's stupid, he's never really going to believe that he's intelligent. So there's too much of this kind of data that when you look at the men and women that are coming out of homosexuality and their stories, there's too many similarities, there's too many common themes for me to ever believe that it was genetic. You know, and my own story of overcoming homosexuality is one of just thousands, literally, of people who have come out of homosexuality. But there are people who attempt this journey and who don't make it, who fall away, who either give up, who just say it's too hard. And, you know, because there are some who, for whatever reason, stop on their journey, doesn't negate or invalidate the other people who have made it out of homosexuality. For example, people who said, well, I tried to give up smoking, but it didn't work for me, so it's really not possible to give up smoking. You know, we would find that idea ludicrous, because there are people who have given up smoking. The gay activist community wants tolerance. They want their ideas and their views to be tolerated. But for whatever reason, they can't tolerate anything else except their viewpoint. They can't tolerate a story like mine that says, you know, I used to be gay, but with the help of Jesus, I've been able to overcome that. Why doesn't the tolerance work both ways?
I believe the caricature that's painted of Christians as being mean and hateful, it creates a context where violence is being perpetrated against Christians. I looked, just a very cursory look online, and in the last 3 years, I found 10 instances of church shootings. That doesn't get reported, where Christians are being shot in church. Christians in San Francisco are living in intimidation. For instance, just recently, gay activists crashed a Roman Catholic worship service, desecrated the Eucharist, and mockingly made fun of the faith there, videotaped the whole thing to broadcast it, clearly sacrilege. And the Roman Catholic Church there did nothing, I believe, because of intimidation. What you don't know is immediately after that, in that same week, a man was arrested for trying to set fire to a nunnery where there were 7 nuns asleep in that building. And it's an incredible context of intimidation. And unfortunately, if that can happen in one city and Christians' rights to worship freely are abridged, that can be exported everywhere.
The setting for that action was, of course, the Folsom Street Festival. Talk to us about that.
Well, yes. The Folsom Street Fair, which is nothing more than a sadomasochistic, perverted event that's literally on the streets of San Francisco, took one of our sacred images, the picture of the Last Supper, and desecrated that by dressing up in leather outfits and putting very obscene sex toys on the table. And it was just kind of an in-your-face picture directed at Christians. And the bishop of the Catholic Church spoke up and said, this really isn't appropriate. So for his actions, these radical gay activists, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, crashed this worship service to send a message that you cannot even criticize homosexuals when they're acting out, even in the most outrageous fashion.
Beautiful Fort Lauderdale in Broward County, Florida, now has the distinction of being #1 in the nation in the spread of HIV/AIDS through male homosexual activity. But when Mayor Jim Naugle attempted to curb the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, he found himself at ground zero in the culture war.
The media is trying to portray me as being a homophobe and guilty of hate speech and an intolerant person. Even though my personal belief is that I don't approve of the lifestyle, I try not to judge people and carry out the duties of being mayor in a way that is based on law and public health.
The mayor angered homosexual activists by announcing that the city would crack down on illegal sexual encounters taking place in public places, such as men's rooms at local parks.
There are websites out there that have 19 pages of places where men can have sex with men and meeting up in public restrooms and other public parks and the like. And it's something that I want to try to eliminate it.
Anonymous sex is one very dangerous public health activity. And especially when you're talking about, the CDC designated category, MSN, men who are having sex with men. Their health risk of anonymous sex are even higher than the average person because they are limited to practicing sodomy.
In late 2007, Mayor Naugle called a press conference to issue an apology.
Well, Mayor Naugle did apologize at the press conference, but he did not apologize to the homosexuals. He apologized to the citizens and for not actually trying to stop this in advance.
That press conference prompted new protests.
I'm asking the Broward County Commissioners to pass a resolution to censor Mayor James Naugle.
Dr. John Diggs came from Massachusetts to support Mayor Naugle's public health measures.
But it should be clearly seen that even today, in 2007, that homosexual acts have a key role to say in the spread of all sexually transmitted diseases, especially HIV and AIDS.
I think when you look at mayors that are around the country, you should be very proud of Mayor Naugle because he does something that's #1, courageous, and #2, puts the health of his citizens at the highest level of priority.
But a heckler tried to disrupt the press conference.
What you people are doing is completely wrong.
After the press conference, the media paid more attention to the heckler than to the medical expert who had flown from New England to attend the press conference. The media interviewed the heckler, who turned out to be an AIDS activist.
The media is playing a big role in this controversy, and I think the media is guilty of censorship because a lot of the points that we are making in this battle are being ignored by the mainstream media.
Similar acts are happening in towns and countries, towns and cities across the country where public health officials are not standing up. The executive, the mayors are not standing up and saying this needs to stop because it's imperiling the health of the public. So I have to applaud Mayor Naugle for doing that.
I feel I have the strong support of a majority of the residents here in Fort Lauderdale, and it really doesn't matter, how I'm attacked. Because of my strong beliefs, I feel that I will continue to advocate the position that is right and that is moral and that is in the interest of lawfulness and public safety. So whatever the consequences, so be it.
Many people think that allowing for same-sex marriage doesn't affect you. In fact, that's one of the main arguments. It only is a privilege for that couple. It doesn't affect anyone else. But we've already seen that, in fact, it does affect other people, particularly parents who want to raise their children with moral beliefs and with the understanding that marriage is between one man and one woman.
I'm concerned about same-sex marriage for a host of reasons, but I think the chief one that motivates me is this, that when government prescribes a wholesale redefinition of the family, it knowingly sets a policy that knowingly deprives children of a mom and a dad. Study after study after study, all the ones that are done in a nonpartisan manner, tell us that kids need a mom and a dad to do well in life. Two moms could be two great moms, but they can never be a great father. And that's the point of it all. The genders complement one another. That was inherent at our design. I can do things for my sons that my wife cannot do just because I'm a man. My wife can do things for my sons and understand and give them impressions in life that I cannot have any hope of providing to them because I'm not a woman.
It's profoundly wrong to make children the guinea pigs in a very radical social experiment.
So those who are saying, I want to have the rest of the public recognize my homosexual relationship or my lesbian relationship, are essentially saying, don't just tolerate what I do. Don't just say, I'm going to live and let live. Don't just say what anybody else does is their own business and I'm not going to interfere with it. You have to approve what I'm doing. And you don't just need to approve it. You have to say that it's legitimate religiously. You have to say that what I'm doing is not sinful. You have to say that what I'm doing is just as legitimate, just as valid as a marriage between a man and a woman.
You know, the reason why many of us press so hard for amendments to our state constitutions to define marriage as between one man and one woman goes back to our United States Constitution. And there's a clause within the Constitution that's called the full faith and credit clause. And effectively it says this, look, if there's a law in Massachusetts, people in West Virginia have to give it the full faith and credit that it's due. Because of the full faith and credit clause of the United States Constitution, if a couple were to go to Massachusetts or to go to Connecticut or even go to California during the time that was legal and get married in those states, because of that clause in our United States Constitution, in technicality, we are supposed to recognize the laws from the other states, unless we have a policy within our own state to not do that, or within our own Constitution not to do that. Well, that's why these Defense of Marriage Acts were introduced in the first place. That's why throughout the country there are some, I think 39 or more states that have put within their statutes laws that will limit what marriages they will and will not recognize.
It's really interesting when you look at the outcomes of elections. In every instance where the definition of the family has been put for a vote, the American public says, I want to keep marriage a sacred title so that it exclusively refers to a relationship between a man and a woman. And that's universal. Every time it's come up for a vote, it has passed. And the public has said very, very clearly that marriage should be between a man and a woman.
I had always been of the notion that all violent crimes are hate crimes. I've never known a crime to be committed violently that was done out of pleasure.
People need to understand, first of all, that nobody advocates violence against anyone for any reason. And that is criminal. And it's already a crime to assault somebody, and it should remain a crime. And nobody advocates that. But what we have with hate crimes legislation, unfortunately, is it creates a two-tier justice system where we have a special class of victim that is elevated to a higher level of importance over just the common individual. And that, on its face, is a violation of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees equal protection under the laws. Well, if it is a more serious crime to assault somebody because they self-identify as a homosexual than it is to assault a pregnant woman or a little old lady, well, then that discriminates against the pregnant woman or the little old lady. That lifts up the homosexual individual as a more relevant and more important victim and makes that crime a more serious crime. Well, that's constitutionally dubious, to say the least.
So when we pass these hate crimes legislations or non-discrimination ordinances that are out there, we then are creating effectively a brigade of thought police almost this Orwellian notion that we have the government body that is overlooking all of our thoughts and determining whether or not this is a racially motivated or a sexually orientated motivated crime. That's something that we shouldn't be doing. Our justice system is set up to judge action. And when we allow this thought police to enter the occasion, we create up a whole new class of victims and ones that we shouldn't be doing. All victims deserve equal justice, regardless of the motivation of the crime.
Canadian youth pastor Stephen Busan worked with kids from all walks of life. He was a father figure to them, the cool kids, the loners, the straight kids, and those struggling with sexual identity. He ministered to them all. But when he felt the homosexual machine was pushing its agenda to the detriment of those kids, he put his feelings into words and sent a letter to the editor of his local paper, the Red Deer Advocate. The fallout from that simple act gives us a disturbing look into the chilling effect of hate crimes legislation.
I already was writing letters to the editor occasionally, just like anybody else can in the community. But through this youth program, I started to become more aware of how the teens were being intentionally or unintentionally, my belief, brainwashed or lured into, manipulated into believing that homosexuality was normal, necessary, acceptable, and productive. And that was actually, word for word, the initiative of a government-funded agenda program that was being introduced into public schools. On top of that, I found out that a teacher, public school teacher, who started a pro-gay tolerant group within a Red Deer High School, was inviting a gay minister to teach youth the pro-gay version of the Bible. So enough was enough for me. It was one thing, you know, I absolutely believe in tolerance. I believe that someone has a right to claim that they're homosexual in a democratic society, and I believe that if that's what they want, you know, though I disagree with that lifestyle, I believe that it's detrimental to, holistically, to a person's well-being. I believe that if that's the way they want to live their lives, they should have that right to do so. God gives them that right to do so. Where the boundaries were overstepped was when my tax dollars, and it's not about money, was when my tax dollars were being used to fund an initiative that was absolutely against my values as a human being, my values as a Christian. And so I wrote a letter to the editor that was written to be hard-hitting. It was written strong. It wasn't designed to be a fluffy, we're going to meet you halfway. It was designed to say to heterosexuals, to mainly Christian heterosexuals, wake up. Look what's coming in the back door in our country.
The letter was printed in the paper on June 17, 2002. It began with this paragraph. The following is not intended for those who are suffering from an unwanted sexual identity crisis. For you, I have understanding, care, compassion, and tolerance. I sympathize with you and offer you my love and my fellowship. The letter goes on to say, your children are being warped into believing that same-sex families are acceptable, that men kissing men is appropriate, and the homosexual agenda is not gaining ground because it is morally backed. It is gaining ground because you, Mr. and Mrs. Heterosexual, do nothing to stop it. The fallout from the publication of the letter was swift and severe.
Our Supreme Court upheld the Canadian Criminal Code prohibitions on hate speech. What that means is that there is not the same level of protection for freedom of speech in Canada as there is in the United States. And because of that, the Canadian Parliament recently amended the Criminal Code to add sexual orientation to the list of grounds upon which one cannot speak in what is termed a hateful way. If you do, you are subject to prosecution by the Attorney General.
Red Deer teacher Darren Lund filed a complaint with the Alberta Human Rights Commission. 5 years and tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees later, Stephen Busan was found guilty. His reputation has been sullied, and his financial stability has been undermined as a result of this infringement of his basic rights, made possible by hate crimes laws.
The problem with the use of human rights laws to try to enforce a politically correct view of the world is that anyone that disagrees with someone on a political subject will immediately complain about them to a Human Rights Commission in order to silence the debate.
And when the battle gets really thick and it drags on for years, and even some Christians are questioning you start to question yourself, you start to get angry, with God, and things aren't going your way, and then you're found guilty. My goodness, poor me. But the reality is the self-assessment that I've done through that, and the having to truly depend on God, not what God can do for me financially, or not what God can, is He going to win for me? Just depend on Him, and having to sit back as a Christian and say, God, regardless of whether I'm found guilty, regardless of whether people like me, I'm going to hold true to your word. Regardless of the mistakes I make, my ups and downs in life, I am going to continue to hold true to your word and stand strong. And that's what I'm going to continue to do.
What happened to Stephen Busan may be shocking, but closer to home, a group of Christians found that the very act of sharing a biblical message in public can get you arrested and prosecuted in the United States. This is the case where two 75-year-old grandmothers face the very real possibility of spending the rest of their lives in prison. And a young man was vilified by the media for his message of hope to those caught in the grip of homosexuality. They are part of a group better known as the Philadelphia 11. That and more when we come back.
Family values, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and morality are all threatened by a radical homosexual activist agenda that's redefining the family, demanding same-sex marriage, teaching children that homosexuality is normal, homosexuals serving in the armed forces, hate crime laws threatening freedom of speech, laws forcing churches and Christian businesses to hire homosexuals, minority status, and preferential treatment for homosexuals. If you think that agenda is bad for America, you must do something. Call today or go online to participate in the American Family Association's Family Values Survey. We'll send the results to leaders in the media, the entertainment industry, large corporations, and elected officials who support the homosexual activist agenda because they think you don't care. Let them know you do. You can make a difference. Go online at silencingchristians.com to request your copy of the Family Values Survey, or call 800-767-7440, or write to American Family Association, P.O. Drawer 2440, Tupelo, Mississippi 38803. Along with the survey, we'll also send you the book, Homosexuality: Exposing the Myths. Get informed. Be heard. Don't be speechless.
Every year in Philadelphia, they have a celebration of homosexuality. It's called Outfest. It's a taxpayer-funded event where thousands of people come into the streets of Philadelphia to celebrate their homosexuality. So as Christians, we believe that there needs to be a response to a public celebration of sin, such as Outfest. So our ministry went to Outfest. There were 11 of us in total. And ultimately, we had been arrested for singing Blessed Be the Name of the Lord at this event because we were directed out of the event, and we believe that we had the right to be in the public square just as everyone else. What they do is they set up a stage here on the corner of 13th and Locust where this traffic is coming out. And basically on this stage, there's a lot of open lewdness that takes place, a lot of very disturbing things that do take place in front of children. And we were actually entering to the event through this sidewalk here. Right here at this intersection of 13th and Locust, we were blocked by a group of homosexuals who actually linked arms to prevent us from coming into the event.
Yeah, this is a public street. You go where you want.
All right, thank you, officer. This here is obstruction. When they have the signs and trying to block us, and their intent, as they said in the Philadelphia Gay News, is to have us block our message blocked.
If you feel that way, I think you can seek relief through injunctive relief or through the courts.
As I was speaking with him and encouraging him to do something about these whistles that were being blown at us, and they had big pieces of styrofoam that were cut out in the form of angels. and they begin to block us with these styrofoam boards so no one can see us. So when they have their pink signs around us, did you give them the same message?
They're getting ready to get rid of their signs.
But you didn't tell them that they had to get their signs out of here.
11 Christians were arrested that day, including 2 grandmothers. The group became known nationwide as the Philadelphia 11. And they would soon learn that sharing the gospel in public in Philadelphia was considered a hate crime.
Kept taking our pictures and fingerprints, and it was, the longer we were being held, I realized that we weren't getting out right away.
We were charged with 3 felonies and 5 misdemeanors, which could have put us away for 47 years in jail and $90,000 in fines each.
It was totally surreal. I mean, I just couldn't believe. It just seemed like unreal, the whole thing. But then to be charged with ethnic discrimination, I mean, this is absolutely absurd.
Well, the hate crime legislation is going to do away with our freedom of speech. And the churches don't realize it, but it's not going to just be for us who go out in the street and take a stand against it, but it's going to affect the churches.
This is, we believe, probably the first time, if not the only time, anybody has been charged with a hate crime where the instrument of the hate crime is, at least incidentally, a Bible. The whole movement towards creating national statewide hate crimes laws and national hate crimes laws is a really scary movement in this country. And anybody who has any belief in the First Amendment or even the things that made this country great ought to be really scared about this.
You know, it strengthens your faith in the Lord and what He can do for you. And we are going to face persecution. It's promised.
God has called us to love them, and we are there with the message of love, and that is that there is hope and freedom through Jesus Christ, that they can be set free from their sins. And that was what we were there to do. Nothing more, nothing less.
The case of the Philadelphia 11 is a chilling precursor to what we could face if hate crimes legislation is allowed to become the law of the land. A crime is a crime, but we're heading down a road where someone's perception about your motivations and deeply held convictions may get you arrested. Did you know that under these laws, the punishment would be greater for an assault on a 22-year-old homosexual man than for the same kind of an assault on an 85-year-old woman? Tristan Emanuel is the author of Christophobia, the real reason behind hate crime legislation. I had a chance to sit down with him to discuss this very important topic.
I think since the 60s, the church in Canada has been quite silent, predominantly on the issue of human sexuality. I haven't talked about it a lot, and when we do talk about it, we tend to talk about it in terms of protest, because we see what's happened in our culture. But having said that, it still has a chilling effect, because what already was a difficult situation where very few pastors were willing to speak, now that's just reinforced the fact that not only is it maybe not what I want to talk about, but it could get me into a lot of legal hot water as a result of being victimized by a law under the guise that this is promoting hatred through speech. And so most pastors don't want to spend time in the court. They don't want to be criminalized for basically sharing the love of Jesus Christ. And so we completely shy away from that legitimate avenue of discussion, morality, because it's now become politicized. It's politicized speech.
Then my sense is that that makes what's happening to the church, capital C, universal in Canada, even more threatening, because if they were silent pre the passage of this legislation, this will do nothing but further a chilling effect, which will silence pastors even more. The end result of that is you have a lackadaisical church. You've got the church in many respects at Laodicea.
Right. We have compartmentalized where the gospel is allowed to go. That's what we've done. We've embraced the constraints of political correctness, and as it were, imposed that upon the gospel, so that we're prepared to preach the gospel in the private sphere. We're prepared to preach the gospel and share the good aspects of the gospel to everybody, but we shy away from the comprehensive nature of the gospel. What I'm getting at is the gospel doesn't make sense if you don't establish the context for the gospel, i.e. sin and repentance. And there simply are things that people do that need to be repented of.
And though it may be politically incorrect to say it, it needs to be said. Otherwise, the antidote, which is Jesus, doesn't make sense. I mean, fine, you know, absolute free speech can sound pretty harsh. From a Christian perspective, my concern is the whole idea behind the First Amendment was that no government should have the right to bind my conscience, nor the conscience of another individual. No government should have the right to decree doctrinal issues or to hem in issues as profound as human morality, and marginalize what is essential for our foundation as a free and open society. We need morality in order to be free, and we need to have people to have the freedom to promote morality in the public square. Laws shouldn't be based on personal indiscretions. Laws should not be based on people's personal scruples or what they feel is odious. Laws need to be based on something much more tangible, much more absolute than just arbitrary opinion, even if that opinion happens to be representative of a lot of people.
You've probably heard news reports about ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. The name's ironic because it will actually cause discrimination against an entire group, people of faith. But, of course, as we've seen, Christians are the one group that are still fair game to discriminate against in our tolerant society. Here's just a little bit of what ENDA really means for employers nationwide.
Well, we currently have civil rights laws which say in the workplace you can't discriminate against people in the hiring or in their firing or anything else during the workday on the basis of their race, their sex, their religion, or their handicap. Those are protections we have in this country. Well, what ENDA is to add a new category, and that category would be sexual orientation, which you've probably seen lists. There's a list of over 30 different sexual orientations. All of a sudden, they would get all of these benefits, these special protections that have been in the law. And for instance, originally, the original plan was that it would include transgendered as well, which means that, for instance, if you had somebody who came to work and they felt like a man that day, they could go into the male restroom. But if they felt like a woman the next day, they could go into the women's restroom. And if you as an employer stopped them or told them to cut it out, you would now be in violation and a discriminator of their transgenderism. So it would obviously open up Pandora's box for a lot of problems. Mainly, though, ENDA is an attack by the government on religious freedom. It is the government telling people what they believe. When it comes to sexual conduct and sexual activity, people come to their beliefs on that through their religious frame of reference, whatever that is. For the government to come in and say, we are now going to tell you what you can believe and what you can think, that's an incredible violation of freedom of conscience.
Employment Non-Discrimination Act. That sounds so good, but it brings all kinds of problems. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which is a sister to hate crimes, what it means is that a church, for example, who would not normally hire homosexuals to work in their environment will be forced to.
If a person who owns, say, a Bible bookstore says, if a homosexual comes in and says, you know, I want a job here, and the person says, well, no, your lifestyle does not comport with biblical teaching. It is not a lifestyle that we agree with. We have certain standards of sexual morality that we expect our employees to hold to. Suddenly that becomes illegal. And so then the person can file a lawsuit. This is the goose that laid the golden egg. This is the Employment Non-Discrimination Act now that I'm talking about, which is just as serious as hate crimes legislation. That proprietor, the owner of that Bible bookstore, now becomes a criminal, and for merely trying to live out their faith and adhere to standards of morality that Scripture gives us. In that instance, they would be forced to hire this individual, and then that individual would have a cause of action to say, you have created a hostile work environment because you have Bibles on the shelves of this Bible bookstore. So because the Bible condemns homosexual behavior, that makes me uncomfortable, and that creates a hostile work environment. So you have to pull all the Bibles off the bookshelves.
No religious person, especially not Christians or any other religious group, should be somehow indicted or condemned for simply abiding by their religious conviction.
As you can see, our constitutional rights of freedom of speech and freedom of religion are hanging in the balance. Laws and actions that would have been unthinkable even 20 years ago are becoming reality. People just like you and me are being arrested, threatened with lawsuits. They're losing their jobs and struggling to pass their values to their children. But what can we do? And can we make a difference?
The most dangerous thing you can do is be silent. You need to be aware and be sure and speak up.
Now more than ever, it's imperative that the people with traditional values, or just people who love freedom, stand up against this radical homosexual agenda.
Knowing where our rights originate from, and knowing that God has endowed those rights to us, this isn't something that is new to us. It's in our national philosophy, our Declaration of Independence. We go back and look through that, and all we find there's this stratification of different rights that starts at the right of God, that He gave them to us, that we've given them among men, that government could be instituted among us because they can do what we can't do individually, we can do corporately. And so when we understand those rights fully, it allows us to, in fact, it motivates us, it demands that we be engaged in the process. I don't care what side of the fence you are on these issues, if it's marriage or abortion or whatever the issues are. You and I have a duty to government to steward those rights. They don't have any rights apart from the ones that we give. In fact, the Bill of Rights were put into place to make sure that the government said, look, these 10 things, and now they've developed into many more, of course, but these issues here, we're not giving you to government. Those belong to us. That's why the 10th Amendment says those rights not clearly enumerated within this Constitution or given to the states are reserved to the people. And when that's the case, now we understand that it is no longer President Bush or President Obama or Congressman so-and-so and Senator who and such. It is you and I that have the right and the duty to steward this nation. And when we neglect that, we neglect it at our peril.
We need to see more and more people out there come off the sidelines and come out and start writing letters to the editor. Parents, if you find that your kids are being taught in public schools that homosexual behavior is natural and normal, that so-called same-sex marriage is the equivalent of natural marriage, say something about it. Don't go by yourself. Find other parents who are equally concerned and go in groups or strength in numbers. Always go with another group of parents and stand up against it. We found that much of the homosexual agenda is built on a house of cards. And it doesn't take much to blow it over. It just takes people that will have the initiative to stand up against this agenda and to push back a little bit. Write letters to the editor. Call your congressman. Call your senator. Tell them, no, we will not stand for this agenda. We need to get back to reality here and stop pushing the homosexual lifestyle and full acceptance, if not celebration of that lifestyle, on our children and on our larger society.
Well, now it's up to you. We've exposed the plot, and homosexual activists have a very well-planned agenda. And I hope you agree that we don't want them to succeed. And it's not going to be easy to stop them. The conversion strategy that they laid out in the book, After the Ball, well, it's worked very well. They've converted powerful allies to help advance their cause. And now they have a new advantage: Barack Obama. On his website, change.gov, the new president laid out his plans to support lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans. It includes doing away with the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, allowing homosexuals to serve openly in the military, expanding hate crimes legislation, repealing the Defense of Marriage Act, opposing a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriages, passing the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and expanding adoption rights for gays and lesbians. And in addition, he's promised to appoint federal and Supreme Court judges who are compassionate toward gays and lesbians. Now, what that really means is that he's going to appoint judges who will rewrite the Constitution, if necessary, to make it say exactly what they want it to say. So connect the dots. Same-sex marriage means that school children are going to be taught that homosexuality is normal, moral, and the equivalent of a marriage between one man and one woman. Hate crimes laws means that Christians, even pastors, will be prosecuted for teaching what the Bible says about homosexuality. And the passage of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, well, that means that churches and ministries and Christian businesses are going to be forced to hire homosexuals and create a non-offensive work environment for them. I pray that you really get the magnitude of the impact of all of this and the impact it's going to have on your families and on our nation. Our children and our cherished freedoms of speech and religion are very much at risk. The American Family Association made this program possible, and they've been fighting for the family for 32 years. And they hope that this program has motivated you to do something to protect the traditional family in America. You know, the family is the most important institution for a strong and a prosperous nation. But it's also the weakest of our institutions. And unless you and we come together and speak out against their agenda, homosexual activists are going to destroy the family as we've always known it. If you care about that, and if you want to be a part of the solution, you must make your voice heard. And you can do that by participating in AFA's Family Value Survey. Get the survey and fill it out. It's only going to take a couple of minutes of your time, but the impact of that simple act can be enormous. AFA will let the media, major corporations, and elected officials know just how you feel. And is that going to make a difference? Oh, you bet it will. The media doesn't want to upset their advertisers. That's why we'll send the results to corporations. And the only reason politicians and businesses go along with homosexual activists is because they don't think you care. So let them know that you do. And you can get the survey online, and you can also request it by writing to AFA at P.O. Drawer 2440, Tupelo, Mississippi. And when you request the Family Values Survey, also ask for a copy of the book, Homosexuality in America, Exposing the Myths. The book's filled with helpful information, and you're going to want to share that with your family and your friends. And also, we'd be very grateful if you could enclose a gift to support AFA. But you know, whether you can afford to send a gift or not, please get the survey. And remember, be heard. Don't be speechless. I'm Janet Parshall, and I thank you for joining us and taking an active role in building a great future for America.
Go online at silencingchristians.com to request your copy of the Family Values Survey, or call 800-767-7440, or write to American Family Association, P.O. Drawer 2440, Tupelo, Mississippi 38803. Along with the survey, we'll also send you the book, Homosexuality, Exposing the Myths. You can make a difference.
Saturdays on Inspiration.
They took out all references to Jesus.
3 felonies just for trying to share the gospel.
The idea that only special classes of people get special protection violates everything that this country's about.
We're going to see this across the country if people of faith don't speak up to preserve our religious freedom.
Join host Janet Parshall for Speechless, Silencing the Christians, every Saturday night on Inspiration. Available on Dish Network, DirecTV, and cable systems across America.